So tonight we're keeping our eye on the ball so the nation is not caught napping. So Labour has given the ultimatum. There's meant to be negotiations going on between Labour and the federal government. While Labour may be speaking for government employees, what about those not employed by government, who, by the way, are way more than civil servants? So let's get a rounded angle to this one. Let's get more sides to this debate. And we're joined on the program by Mr. Adewale Smart Oyeride, who is the Director General, Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA. He joins us live from our Abuja studio. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on Politics Today.
Good evening, Kayode. Thank you for having us.
Well, it's a big one, really. Yes, a lot of other things are happening, but this is really big because it concerns the livelihoods of majority of Nigerians. Labour's ultimatum is counting down. There are concerns about what will come out of the negotiations with government. And I wonder, for your association employers, are you factored into this? Let's begin with that.
Well, for us, it's something you can call a double-edged sword. And Labour had met government severally in the past. The last being the warning strike, the 2 days warning strike that was called a few days ago. And our position remained the same, and it's basically on principle. And it's basically on principle of appropriateness and the principles that actually guides the environment in which we operate, the labor and employment environment, that if you negotiate, then courtesy demands that you live up to the terms of those negotiations. If you can't, for whatever reason, can't meet up with the terms of that negotiation, there is opportunity to renegotiate an agreement that had been negotiated if you don't have the capacity to implement. But for us as employers, we had said severally that a strike at this point, because employers are basically paying above the current minimum wage, and employers have also gone beyond the call of duty to provide succor, to provide, I don't want to call it palliatives now, to provide welfare packages to make life easier for employers or employees in the private sector. Notwithstanding the fact that employers are currently bleeding, notwithstanding the fact that employers are currently challenged and also facing multidimensional issues as regards operation. But we've done significantly well, and the president also alluded and commended employers in his broadcast in August that we've done quite well. Employers have come up with schemes. Some have increased allowances. Some have basically reduced salaries. Some have come up with working from home arrangements to reduce the pressure on employees. So employers, notwithstanding our challenges, we've done significantly well. Now, a strike at this point will do 2 to 3 things. One, it will compromise the ability of employers to meet its obligations. Not only to government to meet its obligations, even to workers. Now, when you go on strike, which is part of the rights of workers, but for us, the fundamental issue is this. Your obligation to government in the context of tax payments, normally it doesn't go on strike and is not suspended during the time of strike. Your obligation or employer's obligation to credit to the banks and those that have lend a business capital, interest payment is not also suspended during the time of strike. Sometimes salary payment is expected not to be suspended during the time of strike. So for employers, it's double jeopardy when strike is called, especially when we are not the protagonist, when we are not the antagonist. And that remains our position, that government should do whatever is necessary to avert the strike. And if the strike should happen, it will be counterproductive for the economy, counterproductive for workers themselves, and also counterproductive for employers.
It appears this might be a catch-22 situation. A strike might, of course, as you said, cause a reduction in productivity. But at this time right now, with the removal of subsidy, with shrinking income, disposable income, inflation, people are saying it's even difficult to be productive in the first place. So let's speak to this point. as employers, as I said earlier, you employ way more than even government. I'm talking about the Association of Employers with, businesses from perhaps the nano, micro, small, medium, all that. What would be your demands, if I could use that expression, from government in easing the conditions? Because I imagine even for doing business, it is tough, not to talk of people who are employees getting by.
Well, for us, we have, first of all, tabled our request, immediate request to the government on the short-term, medium-term, and long-term request of organized businesses to ameliorate the current challenges that we are currently facing. And those challenges are there for everybody to see. We said organized businesses currently pays over 60 different taxes at both the federal, state, and local government level. Over 60 different taxes. No business survives with that kind of burden. And there are also so many bills at the National Assembly, from the Ninth Assembly, over 21 bills that also has components of employer will pay 0.5%, 0.1% to fund one agency or the other. We have the VAT on AGO, on diesel, of currently being proposed. Those are burdens that we have passed to the federal government. And we are glad that we got a response through the inauguration of the Presidential Tax Reform Committee headed by Taiwo Oyedele. Beyond that, we've also communicated to the government to deal decisively with the issue of forex, which is spiking cost of production. So while we do that, we've also appealed to government that whatever you need to do in ameliorating the burden of employees in the public sector, that government should do. Now we have the 5 billion naira share to states. We have the sharing of rice. Is that sufficient? Absolutely not. Is that a step in the right direction? It is a step. Because you have to understand the nexus between consumption and then production. For us, 5 billion, if well spent, moving into a state economy, will trigger some level of consumption, which will also flow back into production. Because the money that will be shared to Nigerians, whether the most vulnerable, the not so vulnerable, and in fact, we are all vulnerable basically at this time. But the 5 billion that will be shared to those that are called vulnerable, they're not going to eat it as food. They probably use it to buy something, use it to buy consumables, which also feeds into the production system. And as production continues, businesses are in a position to produce for employees and Nigerians to also buy. As I said, is the current effort, is it sufficient? Absolutely not. Government basically need to do more to ameliorate the challenges that Nigerians are facing currently.
So some weeks ago, the president gave that speech where he made some promises, put some timelines to it as well. And I'd just like to get specifics, particularly for businesses, if there's been any movement in that area. There was a promise of, the MSME support financing in the sum of 125 billion naira to be allocated to MSMEs and the informal sector. There's also the 75 billion naira startup intervention proposed for 100,000 startups and MSMEs. These are generally targeted at, employment creation ventures. Has there been any activity in that area? Have you heard anything? Is there any chatter whatsoever that you're hearing?
Well, none to our hearing for now, none to our knowledge for now. When the pronouncement was made by the president, at that time, there was no minister. And we know definitively for you to run that kind of scheme, that expanded scheme for MSMEs, intervention for manufacturing and manufacturing concerns, intervention as regards the purchase of buses, you need a structure, a working structure at the ministries. You need the Minister for Industry, Trade and Investment to marshal a plan to drive that engagement with manufacturers and MSMEs. You need the Minister for Transport to marshal and drive the conversation about how do we implement the purchase of buses and so many other things. At the point where the president made that comment, where he made that pronouncement, no ministers was on ground. And fortunately, we had ministers inaugurated a few weeks ago, and the expectation, and what we have done now, or what we are doing now, is to proactively engage those ministers in all ministries so that the implementation or the framework for implementation can start immediately. While they do that, we have also appealed to government that, look, get the organized private sector involved at the policy formulation stage. Get us involved at the public policy implementation stage, and get us involved at the policy appraisal stage so that we can assess if these policies are actually working or if they are not working. But back to your question, we've not seen anything on ground, but definitely we are engaging government at the ministerial level, both at the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Transport, to make sure that these pronouncements are given effect and given effect to expeditiously.
So clearly there's still a lot of work to be done, and really time is of the essence.
Absolutely.
Subsidy has been removed for months now, and for a lot of Nigerians, things have to be done yesterday and not today. But just a quick one. I've heard time and again, even employees asking, will the palliatives get to us? Are we going to be a part of these palliatives that will be shared? You talked about the 5 billion allocated to state governments. And I wonder if, NECA is also planning to key into that, the palliatives. Is that something you're hoping that NECA might get a share, or employers generally might get a share of the palliatives? Perhaps that answers a question that a lot of employees have on their minds tonight.
Yeah, for employers, the definitive request is, let's deal with the policy issues. If you deal with the policy issues, we deal with inflation issues, we deal with the regulatory environment issues, we deal with the legislative environment issues, because we still have challenges with legislators coming up with different onslaught organized businesses. We have challenges with regulators also coming up with different onslaught organized businesses. We've mentioned the issue of multiplicity of taxes. We've mentioned the issue of access to finance. We've mentioned the issue of a hospitable environment for businesses to thrive. For organized businesses, if you deal with those issues, you have sufficiently created an environment that can help a business to be sustainable. Now, we are talking of sustainability now, not competitiveness, because you have to be sustainable first before you move into the realm of competitiveness. And our appeal to government is this: in whatever palliative, our palliative will be a structured reduction in the multiplicity of taxes that we currently have. A palliative for a business will be an environment that enables a business to thrive, because it's when a business thrives that you can talk of generating employment. It's when a business thrives that government can even think of generating revenue through tax. It's when a business is thriving that the wheel of production in the economy can actually drive. It is said, and rightly so, that private sector creates 8 out of every 10 jobs globally. So if we are to drive this economy out of the woods, if we are to go back to a growth trajectory, then government have to give more attention to the private sector so that we can collectively, all of us, including labor, create an environment that is peaceful for businesses to operate, an environment that is peaceful for wealth to be created, and an environment for wealth to be shared equitably.
Right. So 2 issues I want to quickly deal with as we wind down. First, should labor go on strike? I mean, we hope not. We hope the issues are resolved. It's essentially for civil servants. Doesn't quite concern employees that are employed by members of your association. But that doesn't mean that, the ripple effect will not affect operations. Imagine power, for example, and the list goes on and on. Are you proposing to perhaps be on that table, the negotiating table? I recall I asked earlier, but I didn't quite get a clear direction. Are you proposing to be on the table? Are you on the table? Do you think that will have any impact on the negotiation?
Negotiation on the table with government, or table with employers, or with our employees?
With government. The tripartite arrangement, the negotiation will be seen with federal government and labor.
Well, so far, the negotiation that has been held has been bipartite in nature, government and labor. And we are not privy to the dynamics of that conversation. But what we advocate is really a tripartite engagement. Because if you deal with the issue of labor, let's say tomorrow government awards a 100,000, make an award of wage award of 100,000 to labor. Now, if you don't deal with the macroeconomic issues that organized businesses are facing, the cost of goods, the high cost of goods and services, will neutralize whatever allocation you have given. So the wisdom is, let the conversation be tripartite. While we are addressing the concerns of labor, you are also addressing the challenges that employers have. As I said, to also repeat again, if you deal with one part, you allocate, you make wage awards.
Yes.
And you don't deal with the issues of cost of production. Whatever award you have made will be neutralized by the increasing cost of production. So you just come back to ground zero. So a tripartite arrangement, as you mentioned, is desirable, and right. That's what we advocate for.
On a final note, Mr. Adeola Smart Oyenride, I wonder, how did you receive the announcement by government on the president's trip, the India trip, G20, those deals even with the UAE, as local businesses, owners of businesses, employers? How did you receive this? Are you receiving it with cautious optimism, perhaps with some concerns? Perhaps this might crowd out the businesses of your members. How are you receiving this, on a final note?
For Nigeria is a huge market, very huge market. And we welcome the effort of the president, of the government, to attract foreign direct investment. We welcome the efforts to bring in more investors to this country, which is needful, really. But our main concern is this, and we have also communicated at different fora. Let the president spend many months in different countries attracting investors. If we don't resolve the current issues that are bedeviling or stifling organized businesses, those businesses that will come, they will face the same challenge, the same problem that we have created, the same contradiction that exists in the system, they will face the same. And the same way that we have businesses shutting down, divesting out of this country, those businesses will probably also face the same challenges. So it is nice, awesome, beautiful that we are attracting foreign direct investors, but we also want the government to deal with the contradictions in the economy, the contradictions and the challenges that organized businesses are facing. If not, we will make much progress with those investors. And come to think of it, just a last shot for me. For an investor to bring his capital to this country, it might get a dossier from the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. It might get a beautiful, a sonorous prose from the government itself. But before it will come to invest, it will most likely call another investor, call a friend that has invested in business and ask, how is the environment?
Right.
How is the legislative environment? How is the regulatory environment? Is it conducive for a business to be sustainable and thrive? If the testimony of the current investors in this environment is negative,
right,
it is doubtful if such investors will bring their capital to this environment. Well, and that is the message you want to communicate to government. Let us deal with the current challenges that organized businesses are facing. Then it becomes a cause and effect situation.
Indeed.
The environment is clean, environment is hospitable, investors will naturally run to this country to invest because we have
I think that's a great place to anchor.
We have the people.
Indeed.
And we have everything to survive here.
Well, that's a great place to anchor. We'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Adewale Smart Oyenride, the DG of NECA. Thank you so much for your time on the program and wish you the very best.
Thank you for having us.